Welcome to NovoEDTalks, where we reveal real-world strategies and expert insights from learning and development and HR professionals. In every episode, we chat with practitioners, course designers, HR folks, learning strategists, and other business leaders about their experiences and the evolving trends shaping how we learn, lead, and grow at work. Before we begin, a little about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab, NovoEd is a people-centered, capability-building platform that helps organizations scale deep skill development and human connection. Through collaborative, cohort-based experiences, NovoEd empowers teams to learn together, perform together, and lead together, because learning is most powerful when it's shared. And today, we're excited to be wrapping up Season 2 with something special, a two-part finale that brings together three of the brightest minds in HR and talent development for a roundtable conversation about the future of leadership, mentorship, and organizational growth. Joining me in this discussion are Dr. Benjamin Granger, Chief Workplace Psychologist at Qualtrics, where he leads global research on employee experience and organizational culture, helping HR and business leaders understand what truly drives engagement, belonging, and performance. We'll also be joined by Karen Ganitsky, who leads global sales learning and development at 3M. Over her 16 years with the company, Karen has shaped programs that connect people, products, and purpose, creating learning experiences that drive business impact across global teams. And lastly, Kathy Burton, Vice President of Global Learning and Development at Robert Half, will join us today. Kathy brings a wealth of experience in developing leaders at every level and a deep commitment to empowering both HR and L&D professionals to unlock potential in a rapidly changing world of work. Across this two-part series, we'll explore how organizations can preserve institutional knowledge while preparing the next generation of leaders. We'll discuss what it really means to lead across 5 generations in today's workforce. We'll look at how inclusive leadership programs can bring out the best in every learner, and how HR and L&D can work together to build stronger, more resilient organizations. It's a conversation about change, continuity, and the power of connection, and we can't think of a better way to close out this season. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 1 of our 2-part NovoEDTalks Season 2 finale. I am so excited for our discussion today because we're really starting to see folks address some of these topic areas that we're going to get into head on in some amazing ways. And I think this conversation is going to be incredibly relevant and evergreen for the years to come. What I love most about chatting with folks like Karen, Benjamin, and Kathy is that they truly love what they do, and they are people-first people. They have amazing perspectives that are absolutely worth tuning into. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Our first topic area today has to do with mentorship and succession planning. Succession planning has evolved from an HR formality into a cornerstone of business resilience, yet most organizations remain underprepared. In fact, according to a SHRM.org article from 2024, 56% still lack formal succession plans, leaving critical roles vulnerable when leaders retire, move on, or face unexpected challenges. As the pace of change accelerates and the workforce continues to diversify, organizations face a dual responsibility to protect the institutional knowledge and cultural foundations that define them, while also cultivating the next generation of leaders equipped to navigate new realities. Mentorship and succession planning now serve as critical bridges between experience and innovation, ensuring continuity, connection, and growth across generations. Before we turn it over to our panelists, let's hear from some of our Season 2 guest speakers. First, we'll hear from Eddie Brasher on how mentoring fuels growth and deepens connection.
ERG is responsible for several mentoring programs across the enterprise targeting diverse populations and career stages. And these programs have been hugely a success, not only because they meet a clear demand for our employees who are asking for mentors, but because they also are backed by our leaders across the business. So that visibility and advocacy really gives the program some real weight. And the impact of these mentoring programs through our ERGs, we've seen a lot of employees grow in their confidence, their ability to build cross-functional networks and really gain access to opportunities that they may not have had otherwise. And the ripple effect of this is on engagement, skill development, and being able to retain some of our top talent as well. It's been a real textbook win for both our people and our performance.
Next up, we have Michael Martin on why developing future leaders starts long before a promotion.
We have our manager curricula or leadership curricula. We want to obviously bring in aspiring managers. So we don't want to wait until you get the promotion. And then now we want to, while you're doing your new job, trying to take a lot of training. So we want to really get you in there early start taking that training and develop you as a manager. So we have that full bench of potential managers who are, pretty much ready to go. And not only does it help them as a manager, but it can also help them as an individual contributor to kind of look at that information and understand, the balance of coaching and doing it on your own.
Next, we hear from Arlene Mabry on the importance of modern mentoring and how to meet people where they are and scale.
We are creating a platform where anybody can actually figure out how to get what they need and not feel like only the special people get to do this. We're all special people and you need this. So that's where we're going. We're opening up platforms, but what's really key is the baseline understanding. What is a mentee and what is a mentor? And then when we even look at that need for sponsorship, why is it that you need somebody to kick open a door that no matter how hard you try, you can't open it? That's not unique to you. That's the way it goes. And so and again, it's really helping everyone understand you can't get from A to Z by yourself. And there are milestones along the way. And building tools. And I worked on one last week that I was testing, where if I continue to reshape what I said I was looking at it, would it be able to spit back to me instantaneously? Here's another person you need to talk to. Here's another class you might want to take. And as long as and so I test everything, play with everything. I think that's really going to be the cutting edge future of what mentoring is going to look like. Is using technology in the right way to really give you real time actionable things based on what you said you needed, not on what I thought you might need.
And next we hear from Jennifer Rice on the rising urgency of knowledge transfer and succession.
I think everybody still really struggles with the fact that we have 5 generations in the workforce, right? So we also have an aging population and experienced workers that are now leaving. So how do we retain that knowledge? How do we ensure that we have a succession pipeline in place and that those people are being upskilled so that they're ready to take on new roles and responsibilities?
And lastly, we hear from Madison Gaddis on how she's seen organizations elevate and prepare for the next generation of talent.
One of my favorite things, we talked about mentorship a little bit earlier before the call, and I think seeing mentorship, but not just that, the idea of sponsorship and advocacy for succession planning and thinking about how do we bring the younger generations up and prepare for kind of the silver wave that is coming for retirements. And it's been really great to see organizations embrace that in different ways.
And now we're going to turn it over to some of our panelists to hear their perspectives. What does an effective mentorship or succession planning model look like in today's rapidly changing workplace?
Well, I can jump in. I think there's a role for both of them, and they are interdependent. I think from a mentorship program, it's a culture, it's a mindset. It's not what it used to be in the sense of for your brand new hires. I think that it's for everybody. I think that it gives perspective across the organization. I think it gives reverse mentoring is fantastic from generation to generation. I think mentoring into helping transition into new roles, mentoring transitioning into a new organization. And then as far as succession goes, I think succession planning has to be future oriented and somewhat objective. When you're going into succession planning, you're assessing and analyzing the bench that you have. And by nature, we're subjective. We're humans. That's how we operate. And so I think if we're able to bring in data that can help balance our perspective to reach an optimum level of objectivity is ideal, such as, past performance reviews, employee engagement results, anything along the lines as far as where they've gone, what their promotion rates are, what their retention rates are, and those type of things. So I think it takes creativity. I think it takes objectivity, but it also takes a lot of intentionality. I think that there needs to be a regular cadence with succession planning to be able to continue to have that momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Benjamin or Karen, anything to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I love what Kathy said. I think when it comes to succession planning, everyone should always be in a mindset of thinking of the health of their organization. We call it the who here, right? And so who from the organization would take your role and how are you preparing them to do that? So beyond the skills they need for the role, to get better at the roles they have, what skills do we need to develop in them so they can eventually do my role? Assuming I win the lottery, or I get promoted into another position, or I get voluntold to do another position, as tends to happen in these organizations, then who's going to take mine? And what are the things that they don't like about mine that we can work on those skills so that they're more comfortable? So if everyone is in that mindset, and again, I love Kathy, what you said, it's a culture that it has to come from the company building that culture and just being very intentional as leaders and as educators in our organization to create that mindset in the people.
Well, I love one thing that really resonated with me was with Kathy, you mentioned a couple of different data points that we would want to consider in succession planning. Karen, you also pointed out this really important principle of the leader should partially own that. And that was something I learned as a leader early on is part of your job, Ben, as a leader, is to figure out who your future leaders are going to be. And I think that's part of it, of building that tactical way to build that culture is to build that accountability. But back to what Kathy was saying, that mix of those data points, that reminds me of so often people complain, and we see this in employee engagement results in the work we do with our customers, of people complaining of we've promoted these leaders who deliver results, but they're also total jerks. And so what you pointed out, Kathy, is there needs to be a mix of that. Yes, it's about how much did you sell and how much revenue did you generate, but how did you do it also matters. And considering both of those things. And that is one thing I do see in some organizations that do succession planning really well, and they consider that balance of data. It matters what you did, yes, but it also matters how you did it, because the how is a lot of times the things that build the culture or kill it. And so it goes right back to it. So I love both of those points. And I might also add some data that we've seen in our research. We did a study back in 2023 in conjunction with Charter, and we went out and we studied 3,000 US workers, and we were asking them about all the developmental opportunities available to them in their organizations and on-demand training, formal training, all these different things. But the single most important that was identified by employees was mentoring. That was the most valuable out of all of the potential developmental opportunities. The downside of that is that less than a third of our sample said they felt they had access to mentoring and coaching. And so this is one of those things that appears to be really valuable for those who engage in it, for mentees and mentors. And it can be informal, but a lot of the workforce doesn't see that opportunity. And that's a huge miss.
That's an incredible statistic, Benjamin. Karen, did you want to touch on mentorship at all? I know you talked a little bit about succession planning, but do you see mentorship, working into that, or like, Kathy mentioned, are they interdependent, or how do you all treat it at your organization?
I'd say they're interdependent. I don't know that we treat them like that intentionally, but so our company at 3M, we have many mentorship programs. We have one through our Women's Leadership Network. We have one through our business. We have one at the sales level. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think people that are looking for an opportunity to grow should join them. Not all mentors are going to work out. Like you're not going to have chemistry with everyone, and that's fine. But there's some relationships that will spark there that will be invaluable for the rest of your career. And that does play into succession planning because through mentorship, we transfer knowledge and skills from more senior leaders to newer leaders or emerging leaders in the organization. And as you said, sometimes it becomes reverse. I had a mentor once that got assigned to me. I was super intimidated. They were like super high profile. And now he even meets with me to talk about like situations at home. And I'm like, I don't know, give you advice on that. But you spark really good professional relationships that develop in more ways than one as humans, not just as professionals. So you are building the workforce of the future. You are adding to that kind of spices of the recipe of succession planning.
To completely back up your point there, Karen, in that same study that we did, let me back up. And a lot of the research we do, we find that career growth and development is super important. It's one of those persistent drivers of employee attitudes, what makes them stick around, see a vision of the future, see themselves at the company in the future. But a lot of times when I talk to executives, they assume that employees conflate development with promotion. And we just, is that true sometimes? Sure. But by and large, that's not what we see. And when we dig into those mentoring relationships that you were alluding to, Karen, we asked people, well, what do you hope to get out of it? What do you get out of mentorship and coaching? The promotion was very, very low on that list. It was networking. It was learning how to develop leadership skills. It was learning how to understand the business and how we make money. It was those people related things. And it's not all about promotion. It was about building a network.
That's incredible. Kind of moving into our next question on mentorship and succession planning, how can organizations balance honoring legacy while preparing new emerging leaders to innovate and lead differently when appropriate?
So I've pondered this question a few times because as we talk about the different generations and how business is led 50 years ago to today, and we have a mix of those mindsets in our organization, it's creating a network of mentors becomes super important because you want to balance out the knowledge and skills you want to translate and to transmit, but you also want to allow for change to happen in the organization. And I think that's such a critical sweet spot in making sure that our knowledge and that know-how isn't lost, but that we can evolve to the new habits that maybe the newer generation is more prone to go into. So I don't know that I have an answer, but I think that's just such an important consideration in how you frame up and lead the mentoring topics, if it's a guided mentoring that an organization is providing. Giving those framework and the guidelines and the topics is going to help instill the right conversations. So I definitely think that you need to balance out the legacy with the innovation and this new mindset that comes with and the new culture that you're trying to drive. Like, how do you use the mentorship programs to help you drive that culture change?
I'll jump in there too, Karen. I think the biggest piece that I think is grounded in connecting and respecting the legacy and the different generations is keeping an eye on or keeping grounded in what's the future of the organization and what does the organization need and what is my role in that? Because I think we get lost at times with a lot of the times our older generations are going to be in what we would call a higher authority role. They've been there longer, they've been in their career longer. They may quote unquote know more. Having that said, there's this dynamic that takes place that those that are in kind of higher hierarchical roles or authority roles will prioritize skill sets that helped them be successful. And they will look and develop those skill sets in generations below them or behind them. And what ends up happening a lot of the times is some of those skill sets are what we would call a diminishing skill. And they're not necessarily paying attention to what I would call an emerging skill. And a lot of our younger generation are maybe a little bit more in tune to or adept in those emerging skills. Could be technology, could be adaptability, it could be change, it could be dealing with ambiguity. And so I think there's something to be had around keeping a view to where is the organization going? What does that require from a skill set perspective, mindset, approach? And then looking at that with a little bit more objectivity across the board to help develop those emerging skills and keep the diminishing skill in check, I guess, is the best way to do that. So it's trying to even it out a bit. I don't know if this is translating very well what I'm articulating, but it's really, I think it tends to be those in higher authority positions tend to hang on to or prioritize skill sets that may not necessarily be as important in today's world or moving forward in the future. And so I think it's really important to keep that perspective and balance.
Absolutely. I mean, I turn it over to you, Benjamin, to get your maybe, professional psychological standpoint on that, because I think that's like a real inherent thing as people, right? We still want to feel very important and valued, and what we do is really important. So maybe that's, lends itself to people holding on to like, no, these are the most important skill sets. But is it really, what would you say about that, Benjamin?
I think that's a good read on it, Melissa, and I love that point Kathy's making. I mean, we come back to this meta principle of balance, just like we did in the first. This balance of, and I like what you were saying, Kathy, as a mindset that we can, right, and we can hold leaders accountable to that. We have to be future oriented, right? Our objectives for next year need to be future oriented. What future skill sets? So that can materialize very tactically. And I think there is something to be said for what you said, Melissa, and that if I was successful then that must be the things I did must be the right way to do it. And that's not wrong, but it's also not wrong that other people who are newer in the workforce who want to change the idea might also have a good idea. Those two things could be true at the same time. Those things are in superposition, so to speak. So I like that view. And this also reminds me of some work we were doing last year. We did a big study of the global workforce. I think it was right around 35,000 global employees across 20 something different countries, all major industries. One of the big themes we picked up was that younger workers that are coming into the workforce, one of the things that really motivated them in particular was being able to challenge the status quo. Now, when we took that finding to a lot of our clients, who, to your point, Kathy, many of them were in older generations, they were in decision-making positions. That didn't really hit them all super well. And they were like, okay, but some of these people just came in here and they don't know our 100-year history or our 50-year history or how we got to where we got. And again, both of those things can be true at the same time, but it didn't hit them the right way. And so I shouldn't say some of them, it didn't hit the right way. So again, how do we balance that? Well, it reminds me of this parable of tall poppy syndrome. And my Australian friends were telling me about this. In the fields in Australia, there's these poppy fields where they all grow in uniform, but then every now and then you'll see one little poppy plant rise above the rest. And what literally happens is the surrounding poppy plants start to siphon off resources from that outlier, and they pull it back down till they're even. And that sort of reminds me of the old SNL skit with Sherry O'Terry. You remember Sherry O'Terry's character? She'd be, simmer down now, It's like, that's kind of what we do to the new hires that come in with all their ideas, their new ideas. It's like, hold on, Junior, you just got here. And the question I think we pose to ourselves is those of us, myself, I'll speak for myself, I'm a little bit older generation. Is that really productive? Is that really the most productive way to harness what these folks are coming in? Some of those ideas might be crazy, but some of those ideas might be fantastic and might actually lead us to drive some innovation. So back to your point about balance, both of those things, the way we got here is valuable, our skill sets are valuable, but also their ideas and these new challenges are also valuable. And we need to try to figure out a way to incorporate both.
I like using, to your point, I found it super easy to speak about this when I was managing a team of engineers. No, we would hire them fresh out of college. And it's really easy to speak of it then, because when you take the expertise of extremely senior technical employees that are at the plant, that have worked on their technology line for decades, and you mix that wealth of knowledge with the newbie who's coming in with all this fresh, right out of college, cutting edge, call it what you will, the newest toy, the magic happens. So when you pair those, the magic happens. So it's really easy to explain it through like an engineering based scenario. Now we just have to translate that to the business side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Karen. Thanks for that example. I really like where we're going with this topic of mentorship and succession planning, but I think it naturally leads us into our next topic, which we're going to talk about, which is leading across 5 generations. For the first time in history, in some organizations, up to 5 generations are working side by side. Each brings distinct values, communication styles, and expectations for leadership, learning, and growth. This convergence creates both opportunity and tension as organizations strive to unite employees shaped by vastly different experiences and worldviews. Bridging these differences requires intentional effort. Leaders must foster environments where experience and innovation coexist, and where every individual, from the newest hire to the most seasoned professional, feels valued, heard, and included. Creating that balance is now essential to sustaining collaboration, trust, and shared purpose across generations. Before we turn it over to our panelists, let's hear again from some of our season 2 guest speakers. First, we hear again from Madison Gaddis, a quick lens on the multi-generational realities shaping today's workplace.
That and the generational shift. We have every generation, except for Gen Alpha, of course, they will be here quickly. But we do have every generation in the workplace.
Next, we hear from Cassie Matheson, a look at how younger talent is reshaping expectations for how they learn and make decisions.
That's something that we recognized and heard back from our Gen Z, that they would rather experience something to make a decision that could be lifelong than just hear about it. And that's something I appreciate about this next generation, is they really want the experiential experience.
Next, we hear from Laura Ashley Timms, perspectives on motivating and developing employees across 5 generations.
And then on top of all of this, we're managing for the first time ever 5 generations in the workforce. So we've got to understand how to motivate and develop someone who's nearer my age and someone who my children's age who are just joining the workforce now. And we've all got very different expectations of what work is for us and what it's there to do. And one of the only things we probably have in common is that we would like our managers to coach us and not boss us.
Next is Zach Kuntz, highlighting how new generations are reshaping how we design and deliver learning.
Most of our new hire employees are typically millennial Gen Z. They're young, usually 18 to 30 years old. And so the biggest challenge we have with learning isn't necessarily so much technology like we would have had previously in the call center industry, but more so keeping their attention. And so we have to really change things up, the way that we're presenting information. I believe one of the studies that one of our corporate training people she likes to cite is about 5 or 6 years ago, even just before COVID, the average attention span of an adult was like 3 to 5 minutes. Now it's down to like 2. And so you really have to really focus in on what people are saying to make sure that we're actually keeping their attention and moving through.
And lastly, Brian Dennis gives us a reflection on generational differences and the self-awareness needed to bridge them.
The other thing I would say that I've really looked at and thought about, probably more recent than over the last 4 or 5 years, is generational differences. We have anywhere from 4 to 5, roughly, if you look at some of the data and all that, generations in the workforce now. And that also leads to those challenges internally where we don't understand each other. And so a lot of these things, you have to be self-aware. So that's a challenge there.
Now that we've heard from some of our season 2 guests about how they're handling leading across oftentimes 5 different generations in the workforce, let's hear from some of our panelists. How are you adapting communication, learning, and engagement strategies to reach 5, sometimes 5 distinct generations in the workforce?
So I'll start with this one. I think it's rooted in respect, and I think it's also rooted in curiosity. Everybody has value to bring. So kind of like Karen's point previously about, the newbies and the tenured engineers, you bring them together and somewhere in the middle is the magic. And so we've tried to really kind of go away from what I would call the stereotypes of the different generations, but we've worked very hard and intentionally to highlight the value and the benefit that each, regardless of the generation, bring to the table. Because everyone has their own superpower. Everyone has their own magic, insight, talent to share. And so by inviting that kind of curiosity mindset, that learner mindset to the table for everyone, it really does help bring everybody together, and it starts to dispel or diffuse any, that generation's entitled. They don't want to work as hard as they have. They didn't have it as hard as I did coming up through the organization, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's I feel like comparison, I forget what the analogy is, but comparison is basically the death of all joy. And so it's one of those things that if you really start to compare one generation to the next, or you to me, it turns into a competition. And what you're after is common ground and collaboration, and inviting all of the distinct insights to the table and to the conversation, because we all have a gift to give. We just need the opportunity to do so. And so if we just invite that kind of mindset of reciprocation, we invite that mindset of learning or curiosity, I think that's where it really does start to establish that common ground for all generations to anchor to. And then it just becomes a cultural behavior that is expected.
I might add, I've personally never really been a fan of the generational tags for a lot of the same reason you mentioned, Kathy. And I think it's really just a proxy for shared experiences. And I think that's probably a better way to characterize it, because when we've looked at generational differences by generation, where we actually see what the variable that's really accounting for the most variance in generation is simply age. And it's actually much better predictor of some of those things than what period were you born in. But where I do give generation some credence is that there is a meaningful, when you have a group of people, for example, who grew up with technology in their pocket versus those that didn't, that'll materialize in different expectations and needs in the way that they accept new technologies. Pretty soon, we're going to have a generation who grew up with AI in their pocket. That's going to be, is that shared experience going to be meaningfully different? Yeah. But I also, kind of back to that common ground point, Kathy, as a psychologist, I often like to anchor back to fundamental universal human needs. And they're largely the same. I'm a big fan of David McClelland's theory, back all the way back to the 1960s, where he just simply said, look, people have three fundamental psychological needs. They need to affiliate. We're social. We like to be part of a group. We need to belong. We need to achieve, back to that need for growth and development that we all have, and the need for control and power, to control our own destiny, to have some self-efficacy in what we're doing. I think that's probably true of every human who has ever lived to some degree. Now, how we go after those when we're later in our career or early in our career might be meaningfully different. The way a digital native might meet those needs might be a little bit different than those who weren't born as digital natives, but the need's the same. And so I think that's a nice way to show people that, hey, the way you're looking to meet this need might be different, but the need is pretty much the same across all of us and across all these different generations. And based on all the data I've seen and all the work I've done, I stand by that. I think that is true. Great example, my good friend, Dr. Steve Hunt, always says, my kids listen to different music than me, but we all like music.
I love that, Ben. And I'm going to add on to the common ground. So I don't have my lanyard on now, but I wear one intentionally that only has the company logo, because you'll find all the varieties with the divisions and the products and the portfolios and the programs, right? At the end, we all just want this company to win. And we want to win as employees, because no one's here to fail, right? As you were saying, we want to be recognized and we want to be part of something. And finding that common ground, it interrupts that thought process of kind of the complaining, right? And the critiquing of the differences. So there's other ways that so kind of now bringing it back to that common ground and that goal that we have in common. And we do teach about generational differences, like how are we different and why are we different? Because when you understand why, it becomes easier to adapt. But I think another thing that's super important is there's so many personality assessments out there. And we use, for instance, like Insights Discovery, we have Strength Finders, we have different ones. That literally has chapters on how to communicate with others. And it's a really good tool to help you become aware that your communication style isn't someone else's. And taking the time to understand those communication needs of other people is going to help you achieve your goals faster. So implementing maybe, I don't know if it's simple or easy, or maybe they're not as simple as easy, but taking the time to do those types of implementations and programs go a long way in helping the organization move faster and people succeed faster.
And I feel like people just get along with other people better, right? Like those are skill sets we can use outside of our job with our partners, with our children, understanding how they communicate, right? Can we talk a little bit more though about, finding that common ground? Kathy, Ben, do you have anything, that you would suggest to folks to, implement to help find common ground?
I would default to culture. I would default to organizational values, mission, vision, purpose. Going back to what Ben was saying, as far as like we're all fundamentally wired the same. It's that affiliation side of things. We want to belong. We want to feel like we are contributing to a greater good. We're not meant to be independent beings. And so I think if we can create a culture within the organization that people can identify with, that it aligns with who they are, it aligns with what's important to them. If they feel as though the peer group that they have, the leadership that they have, or the organizational culture they have, they feel as though it's a bit of a reflection of themselves, I think that really helps to find that common ground. It gives everyone something to collectively anchor to that will, beget the level of discretionary effort that we're all after as an organization or as a team. It begets the retention, the engagement, the loyalty that we're looking for from our employees and from our leadership. So I think that's where I would go with it, as far as do we have some burning platform as an organization from either a values, a mission, a vision statement, a purpose, some sort of cultural initiative that they can all kind of see themselves in and come to be a collective group that supports that.
I love Kathy and Karen's points here. So I'll just add a tangential point that one of the greatest lessons I've learned in studying organizational behavior is that interpersonal conflict among people usually leads to bad outcomes for the company and the individuals. But task-focused conflict usually is the opposite, and it leads to really productive outputs, better decision making. And that's one of the reasons why diverse organizations, and there's a mountain of research to support this, diverse organizations, those with multiple generations, those with people of different color and background, shared experiences, generally perform better because they make better decisions. They're looking at the same idea from a different perspective. And I'll borrow a note from John Henry Newman. In the 19th century, he talked about the unfolding of an idea, and that over time, ideas themselves are infinite in their possibilities. And so one person looking at an idea or a possible solution is always going to be more limited to multiple people, especially if they have different lenses they're looking at it with. So these ideas unfold over time. And so where we're going back to rooting in that culture of our shared purpose as a place to say, hey, yeah, we are all different, and that's actually a good thing. So encouraging people to avoid the interpersonal conflict that gets people where I tie my identity to my view of the idea that might be different from Kathy's and Karen's and Melissa's. And so I feel threatened by that. No, it's not about me. It's about the company, and it's about our values, about us winning together, as Karen pointed out. And if we can align on that, set those expectations, build that into the culture of how leaders operate, People notice that, they see that, they model it, they do it too, but encourage the task focused conflict. We're not trying to be right, we're trying to get it right.
I really love what everyone said there about how we bridge the gaps between generations. And it really does come down to kind of finding that common ground, but also balance, right? And it's going to be different for every organization. So I think that's super important to keep in mind. What an incredible discussion we're having so far. I'm absolutely loving everything that's coming out of this. Karen, Benjamin, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into part 1 of this special 2-part season 2 finale of NovoEDTalks. Join us in part 2, which is available now, where we'll continue this conversation with more stories, strategies, and reflections on how leaders can truly pass the torch to the next generation.